What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingtheboys.com. We hope all is well wherever you are. We hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and that you're excited for the final preseason game of the year for the Dallas Cowboys. That is correct. Only one preseason game separating us from the finalization of the team's 53-man roster. And before you know it, all systems go towards September 10th and the regular season opener on the road on Sunday Night Football against the New York Giants. I know I'm excited. I know you're excited. We have a lot of stuff in store for you, so make sure you do subscribe here to the Blog of the Boys YouTube channel if you have not already, and make sure to check out bloggingtheboys.com for the latest and greatest in the world of America's team. And if you've checked out BTB as of late, you might have seen an article that we're going to kind of piggyback off of today. Jess Haney, one of our talented staff writers, had this great kind of assessment of the Cowboys roster, kind of put different groups of players into different tiers, right? Because when we talk about the roster, we talk about that term all the time, the 53-man roster. And in case you do not know, teams have to be down to their final 53 players on Tuesday of this coming week. Tuesday afternoon, we'll, of course, have everything you need covering it all of, I was going to say, of course, again, but we'll be covering it on Tuesday night on our roundtable show. So if you want to come hang out, we start that at 8 p.m. Central Time Tuesday evening. But while there are 53 players on the 53-man roster, so they call it that, there aren't exactly 53 spots available, right? You know, players like Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, Micah Parsons, right? Tony Pollard, you get the picture, right? They're not players whose roster spots are truly in jeopardy. There really are just kind of a handful, maybe 10, if we're being ridiculously generous here, roster spots that are truly, totally, absolutely up for grabs, up for some sort of debate. So this is what Jess kind of wrote about. He put players in kind of a locks category, and then he had a bubble category. And these are the players in Jess Haney's bubble. You can take a look at that article down in the description below. Head on over to bloggingtheboys.com. Wonderful job by Jess. And so we can kind of surmise, I think, that somewhere between 10 to 12 players from this list are going to make the Cowboys 53-man roster, but some of them you can make arguments for or against. So I wanted to look at this in a little bit of detail here with you on the channel. Will Grier benefits from the new third quarterback rule. And so while I doubt he will be on the Cowboys, true total 53-man roster, he is somebody who will be around in some sort of capacity. The Cowboys are treating this third preseason game exactly the way it sounds, and that is as the final preseason game. They've said already this week that Will Grier is expected to see a majority of the time, so don't expect to see even much, if at all, any of Cooper Rush on Saturday against the Raiders. Ronald Jones is an interesting name because the Cowboys don't have to make a decision on him right away. He is suspended, obviously, for the first couple of games of the season, and therefore does not count against their 53 players overall. So the Cowboys kind of win in that sense, if you want to call it that. Now, Malik Davis, I think we'd all be stunned if the Cowboys did choose to move on. But Hunter Lipke is a player who has a case, obviously, to be on the 53-man roster as well. We know that Tony Pollard's going to make the team. We know that Rico Dowdle's going to make the team. We know, obviously, that Deuce Vaughn's going to make the team. So those are three running backs right there. Who's your fourth going to be? Are you going to have another true running back in Malik Davis? Are you going to have kind of a different sort of cowboy back type player like Hunter Lipke? Do you want to carry an extra tight end in Sean McEwen? Now, an unfortunate part of this time of year are the injuries that happen that open up some math as it pertains to the roster. And obviously last week, rookie undrafted tight end John Stevens Jr. tore his left ACL. And that, in all likelihood, not only secured Peyton Hendershot's spot on the 53-man roster, but perhaps Sean McEwen's as well. I think it stands to reason that Hunter Lipke or Sean McEwen, they could be kind of battling it out for one spot between the two of them. Jalen Brooks and Simi Fehoko are in an interesting spot. If we kind of play we talk about math and numbers a lot here because that's what this comes down to, right? If you're going to go long at certain positions, you have to go short elsewhere. But if we play the wide receiver game, we've got CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Michael Gallup, Jalen Tolbert. Those are your core four receivers if you're the Dallas Cowboys. Kevontae Turpin kind of has that fifth role. He obviously offers a lot of talent on special teams. I think early on in training camp, I know I did and several other people, and it really cooled off. We thought Jalen Moreno-Cropper could kind of creep up and be that sixth spot. Maybe he's a practice squad player at this point in time, but the Cowboys are a team that's known to carry six wide receivers, especially if Kevontae Turpin isn't going to help out that much on offense. And you have to have somebody who can play, kind of general special teams as well. You need that sixth name is the point. So do the Cowboys want to go with seventh-round rookie Jalen Brooks, or do they want to go with Simi Fehoko, who's been around for a little while now? And the argument probably lends itself in the favor of Jalen Brooks, given that he's on a rookie, he's a rookie who's on the first year of his seventh-round rookie contract. And so that's what I would guess right now. But yeah, I think that we're definitely going to see one of those two players make the 53-man roster. It's extremely unlikely that both of them are going to make it outright. From an offensive line standpoint, and again, this was not an article that I wrote. I write articles all the time, but I loved this one from Jess. As mentioned, I think that Josh Ball is safe if we're evaluating the football portion of this. And obviously, we're moving on to that second column here. Chuma Edoga, who obviously had the injury situation pop up a little bit back now. But I think Josh Ball is relatively safe. He might be the best interior backup the Cowboys have. He's been pretty fine at guard. I know we've talked about that. Speaking of the roundtable, on roundtable episodes as of late, I don't know that all three of them make it between Edoga, Ball, and Matt Farniok, but I don't think it's inconceivable. Matt Waletzko obviously had the injury situation pop up last week against Seattle. It stands to reason he would make it. TJ Bass, I mean, Brock Hoffman, these are names that we like, right? I know there's a big contingent of TJ Bass fans, but you're limited, right? I mean, you're probably carrying somewhere around 10 offensive linemen. So we've got our top starting five, right? You got Tyron, Tyler, Zach, and of course, Terrence Steele. That's five. How do we get now, obviously, to 10? We've got Awesome Richards, who I'm not saying is necessarily better than any of these players, but he's a fourth-round rookie. The Cowboys aren't about to, move on from fourth or fifth-round rookie, fourth, whatever it was. They're not about to move on from him in his rookie season. That's the point. The Cowboys do not generally move on from players they drafted. You could call it that highly, but that highly in their first year in the NFL. So now we're at 6. So how are you going to only keep 4 of this list of 5 names or 6 names, excuse me? It becomes a little bit difficult when it comes to overall roster management. And that's why I do think it's fair to say that some of these players could be on the bubble, may not be practice squad, maybe just moving on. Maybe one of them gets poached by a different team. You never know. Right now, there is kind of a problem of offensive line depth across the NFL. The Cowboys obviously aren't independent of that. The Cowboys are definitely dealing with some offensive line depth issues. And so if we see players get poached, I think that it could certainly be more along those lines, more across that position group, because players are so position hungry for interior offensive linemen, for offensive linemen in general. We saw the Texans make a trade for an offensive lineman on Thursday. And so if the Cowboys try to move on from, say, Matt Farniok, that could be the end of the road for his relationship with them. That's probably where the most contention is. I know it's not, fun to talk about offensive line and offensive line depth and which players are going to make and which aren't, but that's probably the biggest kind of shuffling of cards to this point. Dante Fowler, we actually had an article, it might have been Jess that wrote it, on, what was it, Wednesday this week, that went out at bloggingtheboys.com, and like 5 minutes later, Sam Williams's news came out that he'd been arrested over the weekend. And so the article was about the idea of potentially Dante Fowler not having a spot on the team. And so, of course, it was just a matter of, hey, well, now, Dante Fowler is all the more necessary. I spent a week at Oxnard myself, and I was really impressed with Dante Fowler and what he did. I do think he's a great player. I think he's a really strong piece of depth for the Cowboys, and I think they'd be silly to move on. I mean, you can never have enough pass rushers, ever. You just simply cannot. And so I would be very upset. Maybe not very, but I'd be upset if the Cowboys move on from Dante Fowler. Elsewhere, as we go to that third column now, kind of get to some deeper defenders after this, but Neville Gallimore and Quinton Bohanna, it's an interesting situation that the Cowboys are in when it comes to interior defensive linemen, right? We know that Mozzie Smith is safe. We know that Jonathan Hankins is safe. We know that Osa Odighizuwa is safe. But again, you really, you can't go long everywhere, right? That's kind of the ultimate sort of takeaway here. And so Neville Gallimore has been a name that's been talked about a lot for what feels like a year now, maybe moving on. This is the final year of his rookie contract with the Cowboys. Maybe they feel like now is the time to move on. I would not be stunned if one of them is ultimately on the outside looking in when they initially finalize their 53-man roster. It does seem like Devin Harper and Isaiah Land, who obviously Isaiah is a fan favorite. Lots of people love him. We had a different article, speaking of, that Joey Ikes wrote at our site, talking about players like Isaiah Land, because every year when we get to this point in the preseason, we talk about, if you cut this guy, there's no way he's going to make it through waivers. It's just impossible. It's not going to happen. And then every year those dudes end up making it through waivers and then obviously get stashed on the Cowboys practice squad. And so that might be the case with Isaiah Land. You have to wonder if we talked about the John Stevens Jr. injury. I think the DeMarvion Overshown injury secured Jabril Cox's spot on the team. And it seems like Devin Harper may have you hate to use the word benefit, but his spot on the team certainly became more valuable when DeMarvion Overshown's injury was fully and totally realized. And so I think Devin Harper's safe. Isaiah Land, though, may be a stash and store for the future sort of option for the Cowboys. And Kelvin Joseph, I know he's on this list, and again, I don't agree entirely with it, but I think Kelvin has firmly played his way onto the 53-man roster. We talked a lot at the beginning of training camp about kind of along the lines of the wide receiver position, the core four for the Cowboys as far as corners are concerned. Trayvon Diggs, Stephon Gilmore, Deron Bland. You got Jordan Lewis, who's on PUP list right now, the PUP list, and therefore not counting against the team's roster. And he can start the regular season there and not count against the roster. And they can kind of kick that can down the road as far as figuring out as things move along. They've got Eric Scott Jr., who's going to make the team, and that gives you four if you do put Jordan Lewis on PUP. And so, are you going to keep Kelvin Joseph? Probably, right? So that gives you a fifth. Nahshon Wright seems like he may be on the outside looking in, because Kelvin has really played well throughout the preseason and really kind of justified being around. He's also taking his role is in nickel on special teams really seriously and playing well in those positions in those areas. And that's not an easy thing to do. And so I think that Kelvin Joseph has re-earned a little bit of a benefit of the doubt throughout the course of the last, call it 6 weeks or so. And that might mean that CJ Goodwin is finally out. CJ Goodwin has hung around for a long time as this kind of special teams ace, this gunner for the Cowboys. But roster spots are so precious. And so you have to have special teamers. There's no doubt about that. But maybe the Cowboys feel like they can get that somewhere else, especially with somebody like Kelvin Joseph, who's willing to do a lot of different things. And if you read the article, you will note that Jess says that Brandon Aubrey is on this list despite being the only kicker on the team. And unlike other people, or unlike everybody, right? We sat here and we kind of talked about this player's kind of fighting with this player for this roster spot. Brandon Aubrey, there is no kicker on the Cowboys roster right now that he's competing with. But there are, people who are making videos like this about other teams, and they're talking about players that their team might cut, and they have multiple kickers. And so Brandon Aubrey isn't necessarily competing against anyone on the Cowboys roster as much as he's competing against anyone who finds themselves available for the Cowboys to pursue ultimately as their kicker for the regular season. And so we did not get to see Brandon Aubrey attempt a field goal last week in Seattle. Hopefully we get to see a couple on Saturday night against the Raiders. I think he's safe personally. I think he'd have to have a really bad night for the Cowboys to move on, but we'll see. Hopefully that doesn't wind up being the case. But those are all of the players that we kind of see as being on the roster bubble entering the final preseason game of the year for the Cowboys. So upcoming schedule of sorts here on the channel. We'll have our live post-game show following Cowboys Raiders on Saturday night. You can watch that not just here on our YouTube channel, but on our Facebook page and on our Twitch channel as well. You can also listen to it on our podcast network. Obviously, that's only the audio portion of the show. After that, we'll have a 53-man roster prediction video. I'll also write an article if you want to read that as well. We'll have that conversation available for you, I believe, on Sunday because it's a busy few days around here. It's also a busy few days in my life. I know a lot of you know that I have a dog named Bear. My family and I, we got a new puppy. So we have a female dog now. Her name is Lady Bear. So Bear now has a sister. We're all very excited. So it's our first Cowboys weekend with 2 dogs in the household. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of high energy so far. But so we'll have the 53-man roster prediction. And then, of course, on Tuesday, after the 53-man roster is finalized in the afternoon, we will have the live roundtable on Tuesday night discussing everything that happened, of course, throughout the composition of the 53-man roster and forecasting what moves are likely going to come, because there will be a few kind of incidental things the Cowboys do. They'll cut a few players that they plan on bringing back because they have to store players on certain places, et cetera, et cetera. There's a little bit of roster, jump roping that has to happen. That's just kind of the way that things go in the NFL. But for now, I bid you adieu. My name is RJ Ochoa. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram or Threads at RJ Ochoa, on TikTok at rj.ochoa. If you would like to send me an email, you can do so at rj.ochoa@sbnation.com, or you can leave a comment down below, and we'll do our best to get to those. Also, have a wonderful weekend. Cowboys obviously play, so it's kind of our last chance to practice ourselves for our game day sort of rituals. If you're cooking something, whatever, it's the last chance to kind of play with the recipe before it all starts for real 2 weeks from now. I know it's a hot time of year for fantasy football, so if you've got your draft going, if you're watching a new show, whatever's going on in your life, I hope you're having a ball. I really do. I hope you're having a great time, enjoying it with people around you, maybe some puppies. I hope it's wonderful because you deserve the best. I put the wrong card up on our last video on the roundtable, so I got the right one here. Thanks so much for hanging out, everybody. We'll see you next time.